May 23, 1934, a tan Ford V8 comes flying down a quiet gravel road in Louisiana at almost 90 miles an hour. Inside are two of the most wanted people in America. Within seconds, 6 lawmen hidden in the bushes will fire over 100 rounds into that car. When the shooting stops, Parker and Clyde Barrow are gone. No warning shouted, no chance to surrender, just a wall of gunfire that ended 2 lives almost instantly. So how did a couple from the slums of West Dallas end up dying like this? Hunted down like animals on a back road with no trial and no mercy. To understand that ending, you have to understand what they became. Clyde Barrow was not born a killer. He started out stealing cars and turkeys, small stuff, the kind of crime that gets a young man a short sentence, not a manhunt. But prison changed him. At Eastham Prison Farm in Texas, Clyde was beaten, abused, and forced into brutal labor. He came out a different person, harder, angrier, and done playing by anyone's rules. Bonnie Parker, a waitress with dreams of being a poet or an actress, fell for him anyway. They met at a friend's house in West Dallas in January 1930, and within weeks, Clyde was behind bars again. Bonnie smuggled him a gun so he could break free, and even though he was caught days later and sent back, the pattern of their relationship was already set. Once he was finally paroled in 1932, they never really separated again. Together they built a small gang and went on a spree of robberies, kidnappings, and shootouts that stretched across multiple states, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to be caught sleeping. Despite everything, they were surprisingly unsuccessful criminals. Most of their robberies were small gas stations, grocery stores, sometimes barely more than pocket change. But the body count kept climbing. By the time it ended, Bonnie and Clyde were connected to 13 deaths, most of them police officers. That number is the real reason everything changed. You can rob banks and still get a fair shake in court, kill 9 officers, and you become something else in the eyes of the law. You become a problem that has to be solved permanently. Here is my honest opinion. What turned Bonnie and Clyde from small-time crooks into the most wanted couple in the country was not one single robbery. It was the killing of lawmen. Every time an officer died, it stopped being about property and started being about payback. That was the moment their deaths became only a matter of time. For almost 2 years, Bonnie and Clyde slipped through every trap set for them. They knew the back roads better than the police did. They switched cars constantly, always stealing the fastest Fords they could find, since Clyde trusted the V8 engine over anything else on the road. And they had something the police desperately lacked: speed and unpredictability. Local sheriffs simply were not equipped to chase a couple who could outdrive them and vanish across a state line before backup even arrived. Jurisdiction was another problem entirely. A sheriff in Texas had no authority in Oklahoma, and by the time paperwork and phone calls caught up with them, Bonnie and Clyde were usually 3 counties away. But by early 1934, almost without anyone noticing, the advantage began to disappear. Federal agents became involved after evidence connected Bonnie and Clyde to the interstate transportation of a stolen automobile, giving the Bureau jurisdiction before the final months of 1934. Police departments started using 2-way radios, allowing officers to coordinate in real time instead of relying on payphones and printed bulletins. The old rules that let Bonnie and Clyde disappear into the countryside were closing fast. Then came the mistake that sealed their fate. In January 1934, Clyde orchestrated a violent breakout at Eastham Prison, freeing several inmates, including a young man named Henry Methvin. It was meant to be a moment of triumph, breaking his old prison wide open in front of the guards who had tormented him. Instead, it humiliated the head of the Texas prison system, a man named Lee Simmons, so badly that he made it personal. Simmons pushed for a new kind of hunter, someone with full authority and a single job: find Bonnie and Clyde and end it. That job went to a retired Texas Ranger named Frank Hamer. Then the hunt changed completely. Hamer was not interested in another failed chase. He studied their habits for months, learning their routines, their favorite roads, the towns where they felt safe enough to slow down. He worked with two Dallas officers who actually knew Bonnie and Clyde personally. Bonnie served coffee as a waitress years earlier and had recognized her instantly the first time their paths crossed as outlaw and lawman. This was not a random posse. It was a small, focused team of just 6 men built specifically to outthink two people who had outrun everyone else. Hamer was paid for chasing them. He simply believed the killing had to stop, and he was willing to spend months doing nothing but tracking their patterns to make sure it finally did. And eventually, one tiny mistake gave him exactly what he needed. The final piece fell into place through Henry Methvin's family. Methvin's father wanted his son out of the life and was willing to help the police in exchange for leniency. He told them something crucial, that Bonnie and Clyde planned to pass through the area near Bienville Parish, Louisiana, close to where the Methvins lived. That single piece of information gave Hamer's team something they never had before, a place and a rough window of time. They chose a stretch of Highway 154 south of the small town of Gibbsland. It was narrow, lined with thick brush on both sides, and quiet enough that a car could be seen and heard from a long way off. It was also close enough to the Methvin property that Bonnie and Clyde would have no reason to expect trouble there. The officers hid in the undergrowth for 2 full days and nights, swatting mosquitoes, barely sleeping, waiting for a sound that never seemed to come. What strikes me most about this ambush is how little it resembled justice and how much it resembled a hunt. There was no attempt to arrest them, no warning, no order to surrender. After everything Bonnie and Clyde had done, maybe that was the only option left. But it says something chilling about how far things had gone that 6 armed men decided the safest plan was simply to shoot first. On the morning of May 23rd, Bonnie and Clyde stopped at a small cafe in Gibbsland for breakfast, then climbed back into their stolen Ford. Clyde was barefoot as he often drove, his shoes tossed onto the back seat. Bonnie had a half-eaten sandwich resting nearby. Neither of them noticed anything unusual as the car rolled down the empty highway toward the spot where Henry Methvin's father was parked with a truck, deliberately positioned to look broken down. At 9:15 that morning, the sound of a fast-approaching engine reached the officers hiding in the brush. Clyde slowed the car as he approached the parked truck, likely expecting to speak with Ivy Methvin. Before either of them could react, the officers opened fire from close range. One of them, Deputy Prentice Oakley, later admitted to friends that he could not hold back and fired the first shot before any order was given, a confession he carried for the rest of his life. It was over in seconds. The sheer volume of gunfire meant there was almost no chance for either of them to move, let alone escape. When the shooting finally stopped, the road went silent except for the sound of stalled bullets settling and smoke drifting from the wreck. And just like that, America's most wanted couple were gone. What happened next was almost as disturbing as the ambush itself. Crowds gathered at the scene within hours, some trying to take pieces of the car or clothing as souvenirs. Their deaths made front-page news across the country the very next day. Thousands of people lined up at the funeral homes just to see their bodies, a strange and uncomfortable kind of fame that outlived them both. Even now, nearly a century later, that stretch of Louisiana highway still draws visitors, and their story has been turned into films, books, and songs again and again. So why are people still fascinated by Bonnie and Clyde nearly a century later? Because it captures something deeply uncomfortable about crime, fame, and justice. Bonnie and Clyde were killers, but they were also young, in love, and chased by a country that watched their downfall like a live performance. Their final minutes were not just the end of two criminals. They marked the end of an era where outlaws could become folk heroes, and where the law finally decided that some chases only end one way. But the man who set that trap in motion, Henry Methvin, walked away that day with his father's promise of leniency, and what happened to him afterward is a story most people have never heard, one that is arguably darker than the ambush itself.